Okay, at the end of the last video, I had started answering this question with you, and I'd outlined 3 solutions, so we see this word here, to transport problems. Now what I want to do is just add a few more. I'd started to mention about one-way streets. Now they built, most of the city centre in Glasgow is a one-way traffic system. The reason for that is when you go have a one-way traffic system, vehicles coming in the opposite direction don't cut across traffic, which means that there's a lot less braking and stopping for oncoming traffic, which means traffic flows much better on a one-way system, and people can get from A to B much quicker. And also because there's less stopping and starting, there's a lot less pollution. Another solution to transport problems in the CBD is park and ride schemes. So the way these work is that people park their cars on the edges of the city who are coming into Glasgow, and they catch a bus that takes them into the city centre. And then this solution works because there's a lot less vehicles on the roads in the city centre because people are able to park their car. So they can still use their car to get to the edge of Glasgow if they maybe live in another town or city and are commuting in every day. But instead of going all the way into the centre and having to find parking and create traffic problems, they don't have to do that because they use park and ride. Another solution is the upgrading of the Queen Street and Central train stations. By making those stations much nicer with cafes and places for people to rest, it means people are far more likely to use the train to get into Glasgow city centre rather than use their own car, which obviously using the train is much better for the environment and reduces the amount of congestion. And a final solution is the fact that across Glasgow city centre they've introduced bike hire spots. And these work by people being able to rent a bike for a short period of time to get across the city, which means that they're less likely to have to use maybe a taxi cab or a bus, so therefore it reduces the need for traffic and increases the use of bicycles. Okay, I would pause now and review the answers I've given to the 3 CBD questions. Okay, what I'm now going to do is talk about answering the 2 inner city questions. And the first one, there's a lot of linked statements you're going to make. So we are talking about a developed world city here, so your answer would refer to Glasgow, and you are describing, so you're just painting me a picture of the inner city problems. So the first inner city problem is the fact that a lot of factories have closed down in this area, and the reason for that is that they've either moved abroad or they've moved to the edge of the city. That then means that there's lots of empty, derelict buildings which start to fall into disrepair and make the area look less attractive. And we saw that dereliction when we went to the harbour in Glasgow. The next problem is that because a lot of factories are closed down, there's lots of people who are unemployed, which means that they are now living in poverty. The next problem is because they're living in poverty, many of them, especially younger people in those communities, may turn to crime as a means to make money. Another problem is because those communities are living in poverty, and many of them might be, the younger people might be turning to crime to make a living. That means that other people may choose to leave these areas in search of a better life or the chance of finding a job. So the area depopulates. The final problem is these areas often suffer from really bad traffic problems because a lot of vehicles are moving through them, coming from the suburbs into the city centre. And because the inner city lies between these 2 areas, traffic and pollution can be quite bad. So there's a range of 5 key inner city problems, and you just want to pause now and review each of them and see how each of them connects to the other problem. Now we can see this diagram talks about most of these. Here we've got about changes. So this is really a question about solutions. Can you talk about the types of solutions that have been happening? And because it's referring to a developed world city, you must refer to the city you've studied. So your answer needs to start with in Glasgow. So let's just think about some of the changes. In Glasgow, they have introduced new buildings in the inner city, like the BBC head offices and the new distillery and other large employment areas. The reason for that is to provide not just jobs, but to provide high-paying skilled jobs, which will not just give people more money, but will also attract people to want to live back in the area. Another thing they've done is they've turned the old granary house into a high-end luxury apartment block, which is there to attract younger people in to move back into the city. A third change is a lot of the old buildings haven't been destroyed, they've actually been kept, like the distillery, in order to preserve the heritage of the area. A good example of this is the Finnieston Crane, and that can actually then attract tourists to want to visit the area, which creates more wealth in this particular area. They've introduced lots of entertainment experiences like the hydro, which has been built, and that's to attract people back into the city centre in the evening, or into the inner city, I should say, who might want to live there and also, come and enjoy bands or comedy acts that are playing at the hydro, which means that they're spending their money in the inner city area. A couple of museums have been built, like the Science Museum, as well as the Transport Museum. This is to attract families to want to live in the area again, because there's things to do in that particular area. They have introduced actually a riverboat that runs up the Clyde with various stopping points, and that allows people to be able to travel up and down the Clyde as another way of getting into the city centre. Another solution to get around the problem of traffic is a lot of the roads have bus-only lanes in them, which means that if you're going to the city centre from the inner city, you can get on a bus and get into the city centre really quick, which encourages people to want to live in the inner city. They've also built the Squinty Bridge, which means it's much quicker to get into the CBD from the inner city, which means people are more likely to live in the inner city because there's less traffic congestion around the bridges. So I've specifically referred to a range of specific solutions that have been put in place, naming examples, and more importantly, giving reasons why they actually have done the things that they have done. And what I would do is I suggest you look into your class notes and review those changes and make sure, because this is a 6-mark question, that you could handle an inner city problems and inner city solutions type of question. Okay, now assuming you've paused and reviewed these points, let's move to this final one, which is, why do people move to the edge of cities? What's great about the edge of cities? And you've got some ideas here, but let's think about the attraction. First thing is, land is really cheap. So therefore you can buy a lot of land and build large buildings like retail parks and airport expansions and make lots of profit. Second thing you can do is that because there's lots of land available, that you can expand once you've got your original development, because there's lots of available land for you to extend into. Okay. Third advantage is that there are large motorways on the edges of the cities, and that allows you easy access to the rest of the city as well as to the rest of the countries because there's less traffic. Fourth advantage of locating at the edge of the city is you've got a lot of the suburbs there. So if you're a business like a retail park, you're going to have a lot of population living in that area. Fifth reason that developers love the edge of the cities, especially for housing, is that you're near the countryside. So people are going to want to live near the edge because they can access this countryside. Another advantage of the edge is there's less traffic and pollution. So once again, people are going to want to live there and buy the houses that developers have built near the edge. Another advantage of building housing areas is there's lots of other land uses which people that are wanting to live in that housing are going to use. So there might be out-of-town shopping centres, there might be retail parks, there might be business areas where people can work. And therefore, because of that, people are going to want to buy those houses that have been built because lots of other things that they use every day are in that area around the city centre. Okay, now this kind of question is often linked to a map question, and therefore you might be asked to answer this question in the context of an ordnance survey map. You might be given a space on the map where they're going to build something, and then they'll ask you to give map evidence that shows why they're building it there. One point I should also say, one final point you can add to this little list, is that it's not just that the land is cheap to buy. Because it's never been developed before, it's actually very cheap to develop because you're not having to clear away the old derelict land uses that might have been there from a previous time, as you would if you were developing in the inner city. So once again, that's another reason why it's cheaper to develop. Okay, and what I do is I would pause here, and then if you want to review my third tutorial, you'll find that I'm going to discuss the benefits of the issues relating to developing world cities, as well as how to answer graph style questions.